Well, there seems to have been like a suspension of politics in this country, because essentially Congress has been shut down for 8 months at this point. And prior to that, it was completely gridlocked. You have very little, it seems to me, coverage, even in the political news media, of these races that are going on across the country. Joni Ernst now has decided like she's not even going to go in. She doesn't even have to go and do any more interviews or talk to the media for the rest of her election. And you know what? Nobody seems to, for the most part, except for those people who are aware that she's completely bat crap crazy, and the voters of Iowa might want to know this. Nobody seems to be paying any attention to it. It's all dominated by Ebola.
Did you see what Steve Bannon, he wrote a piece at MSNBC sort of summarizing it? The collection from the fact that she believes that we should completely privatize Social Security. She's talking about that same, Second Amendment.
Got to take up arms if we don't like what the government's doing.
Which is treason. Let's be clear that the Constitution says nothing of that sort. That is treason. Okay, she's saying that, and all the other stuff. We're going to arrest people. We're trying to enforce Obamacare. I mean, it's hard these days because the Republican Party is so filled with crazy people. But in the Senate, at least, if she gets elected, she will likely be Michelle Bachmann of the Senate. She will probably be the craziest. I mean, she may make Ted Cruz look sane. And what does that tell you? When Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and some of these people are actually going to look like they've got somewhat of a grasp on reality. And you're right. She just doesn't have to talk to the media. I remember when Rick Perry ran for re-election last time in Texas, he just didn't go to one editorial board meeting. He didn't care. He didn't have to sit in front of the media. And
well, he's the incumbent. I mean, that's what's amazing about this is that there just seems to be, the country just seems to be vaguely aware that there's a midterm election coming up. Meanwhile, okay, so while you have a citizenry that seems to be not terribly involved in what's going on, meanwhile, there is 300. Well, let me look at some of these figures here. $1.2 billion more, $1.2 billion more spent in these congressional and senatorial races than in 2006. 400 million more than in 2010. 330 million more than 2012. I mean, there's a tremendous amount of money.
That's an important part of it too.
$4 billion overall will have been spent.
The editorial boards. Right. Yeah. I mean, I didn't mean to cut that. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, that's the thing is that, this was always Mitch McConnell's trick down in Kentucky, but at least it used to be sort of, he didn't care. He'd lose the newspapers and everything, but he realized if he raised enough money, you could drown out the newspaper endorsements. Those are once, before an election, and maybe they've got some other critical coverage of you. Otherwise, your commercials are on TV all the time. And now with Citizens United and McCutcheon and these decisions, this is that much worse because it's easy. They're either illegally coordinating, which I'm sure plenty of these guys do, or if they don't, I've worked with a super PAC. I know how this works, and no, we didn't illegally coordinate. But all you have to do is look and see what comes out in the media that the people who you're not coordinating with are doing. That's the easiest way to do anything you want. You release it to the media and you see what people are doing. So the independent group says, hey, we're going to put ads up that say this. Another independent group says, we're going to put up ads that say that. And then she says to herself, well, they're covering those two messages. I'll cover this third one. And, boom. And you've got tons of money drowning out and you don't have to worry about newspapers. Or, you're like Cory Gardner in Colorado, and until that recent debate, you just literally sit there and think you can pull the Jedi mind trick on anybody and you get away with it. It's like, do you believe in personhood? No, I don't. But it says right there, personhood, and your name's on it. Nope, doesn't exist. And you basically just sit there and not acknowledge it. And eventually they just give up.
This is the thing that I think.
And then the Denver Post endorses you.
This is the thing I think that when Citizen United came down, and certainly it was not contemplated by the 5 justices who voted to strike down campaign finance laws, and I'm not even. Please don't mistake what I'm saying as giving them credit for actually looking at this at that level, but even those who criticized it, the focus was all on like the federal level elections, right? I mean, there is the local races and obviously Congress federal elections, but there's tons of money now, hundreds upon hundreds of millions of dollars being poured into state races, statewide races. I mean, the money, it's just, it just seems to be just sort of, leaving everything else in the dust at this point. And you see more and more of it with the action of, how are you going to be a candidate for an office? You're not an incumbent. You can't. But the strategy for you is to hide, essentially, because, she doesn't want to go out there and actually have to talk about her positions because she knows her base knows that she's one way. And if she says that to the rest of the state, they're going to think she's crazy. And if she doesn't say that to the rest of the state, her base is going to say, wait, she's a sellout. I'm not going to vote for her. And this enormous amount of money also prevents that. And it's not that endorsements are that relevant from these editorial boards. Maybe they are, but I don't think they are. But the real issue is that you actually got to go on the record about something.
Right. And let me say one other thing as sort of an addendum to what you were saying, because it's amazing. You're talking about like local elections, and they are. I mean, this is what they realized, and they took advantage of it in 2010, that is still enormously affecting our politics, which is they flooded local legislative races with, I worked on local legislative races, for example, in 2008, and if somebody had raised and spent $100,000, and that was a lot of money. And the party might kick in another 100,000, and there may. But I mean, that's what you were talking about back before Citizens United. And I'm in Ohio, and Ohio is not maybe New York, but it's got Cleveland and Cincinnati. There's some expensive markets here, comparatively. But in some of these other places, it was probably even much less money. You could probably win a state legislative seat with 50, 75,000. They were dumping millions into these seats. And so you had that happen in 2010, and they have since. But here's something interesting that I had just read, that right now they're trying to pass a fracking ban in Santa Monica. So we're talking about a county now.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's go even below to these ballot measures like this. Already $7.6 million in oil money has come in to fight it, to try to convince people to vote
Chevron
against
basically
the ban.
buying that whole thing.
Yeah. So what you're talking about now is it's something that's directly in your interest, right? It's fracking, so it's in your interest of your oil company. A lot of these guys obviously do oil and gas, and you're not even hiding it anymore. I mean, it's basically the oil companies are coming in and essentially they're buying that space to frack in it, and they're buying it instead of buying it by offering somebody a price who owns it. They're just buying it through an election.
Yeah.
And this is completely legal at this point. So, I mean, local initiatives having almost $8 million come in, and we're still over a week away from the election.
Crazy. All right, let's just turn. We only have about another 5-6 minutes here, and I want to turn to some of the races, but and you know how averse I am to patting myself on the back, and certainly other people on the back. But you deserve a pat on the back, and I deserve a pat on the back, or maybe the shoulder. I'm not sure. I get confused in which body part I should be patting. But
if you're playing football, it's the butt. It just sort of depends, what you're doing.
Story in the Washington Post last night. Lori Montgomery, I believe it was the Post, that you've got a lot of Republicans now running on the fact that they're going to protect Social Security more than the Democrat they're running against, basically because of the attempts at cuts to Social Security via the CPI. And, those people who followed our prescription, we're now seeing late in the game a couple of Democrats start to push the Social Security stuff more because this is the stuff that, we've been saying from the beginning. This is Social Security is the perfect thing for Democrats to be running on, expanding it, both from a policy standpoint and a political standpoint. And you see it when, they have to do this. I think even down in Louisiana. She is, I can't remember her name now.
Mary Landrieu.
Mary
She's
Landrieu.
running on protecting Social Security.
Yeah.
She's New Democrat, third wayer.
Yep.
Mark Udall, who I think is terrific on privacy issues, but has been more moderate on other things. In fact, was an honorary chair of Third Way. Sound familiar? Now running on protecting Social Security, which I think, if what he should be doing and what Mary Landrieu should be doing, they should be talking about expanding it.
Yep.
I'm not saying,
And they should have been doing this
it.
4 months ago.
Right, and that's what Bruce Braley is doing in Iowa, and that's what Rick Weiland is doing in South Dakota. And why do we see them, them in the position they're in? I mean, let's be honest here. Joni Ernst has hid some of her crazy. The media let her get away with it. Braley had a lot of gaffes,
Yep.
but since he's come out running as populist as hell, he got to the point where he's a couple points down, and now it's margin of error stuff again.
Yep.
And Weiland gaining in those polls the way he was. I mean, and you can see it. Move On just did a poll, and they looked at what the strongest messages were, and it was simple that you weren't going to let people getting away with cheating on and paying their taxes through ridiculous Wall Street loopholes, that you were going to save or protect Social Security, Medicare, and not let them be cut, and that you were going to support public education and stand up to the people trying to cut it. We know all this stuff, and particularly in a midterm election where the electorate is older and whiter, even the whiter part doesn't matter, older, well, of course Social Security is going to play a bigger role.
Yeah.
And it just, again, of course it's good policy. You and I know that. But the other part of it is, how dumb can some of these people continue to be on the politics of this?
You know what? It's not about dumb. It's not about dumb for a lot of these people, because Mary Landrieu, look, if she knows she's going to this in the late stages, trying to, Hail Mary pass it, right? Then, and same with Udall, if they're going to this in the late stages, this is their Hail Mary pass. They know, and they have known from the beginning, that this is the way to go, but they don't want to be put into that box because they have to answer to their oligarch friends, or their plutocrats. And but when it comes to I got to use it because I got to get elected, this is what they do. And
no, you're right, but a few of them are going to have to ask themselves during this last week, how much do they want to be reelected? And Braley has been catching up. Weiland's been shooting up. The trends in both those cases are good right now. I think most of all, I would ask somebody like Mark Udall, who has been running against Gardner, who's a snake and lies straight out about his personal position and other things. And it seems now that he stopped the bleeding, but Udall is a couple points behind pretty steadily, 2, 3, something like that. Turnout certainly should help. Mail-in ballots in Colorado should help a lot. Because they're saying right now the turnout's looking like it's going to be more towards what it is in a presidential year. There was just a big story on that in Colorado. That should hugely help.
Yeah, we should say they've mailed out something like 3 million ballots,
Yep.
significantly more than in 2012 even.
That's right. But if you want to close this thing down, you want to make sure you win, and these messages are right there. I will. I don't. What is going to hold you up? Is some oligarch that may benefit you in the future, or winning or losing right now? Right now, you need to commit to raising Social Security and to protecting public education from the privatizers. And you say those two messages, you will win.
And the reason why we're seeing them even edge close to that at this point, this is what this illustrates. It illustrates that they know that this is very potent politically and can help them. B,
yes.
They also know that it is dangerous for them to do this if they don't need to do it, because it boxes them in, and it actually, we see it all the time. Politicians run on positions and then they don't execute them when they get into office, but there is some currency to those promises, particularly insofar as it moves the conversation in that direction, the Overton window, as it were, particularly when you have senators who are in the Senate calling for this, and it makes you vulnerable to be attacked on it if you shift your position. So that's the value. From the perspective of people like us, that's the value in trying to convince people like a Landrieu or a Udall to adopt this position while they're campaigning, because even if you're cynical and believe that they don't believe it, it does push the ball forward. even if we
Right.
all know they're not going to necessarily carry through or don't want to. And that's why they come to it late, only when they're in desperate straits.
Well, I would say that Rick Weiland is in South Dakota, a state as red as any, pretty much. Iowa is a purple state, and Bruce Braley is very forward about this.
Yep.
I'd say to Mary Landrieu in a red state and Mark Udall in a purple state, saying you're going to protect Social Security is great, and it's a smart step. But look at what those two are doing. Look at what Mark Begich even is doing in blood red Alaska, and how they're all in these races that they probably otherwise would be behind in. Because of that issue. You want to win. You want to put yourself over the top. Why don't you try? I mean, yes, I want them to be there on the policy. It's the most important thing to me. But when it comes to winning right now, why don't you guys try being like a Republican for once and actually running on stuff that wins, instead of trying to run away from your base and run away from what most people stand for. Again, Republicans don't run on what most of the rest of us want. They certainly stay true to their base. I really do think that's the difference, particularly with Mary Landrieu, who likely is going to go to a December or January runoff, where she's going to have extra period of time of a month or two, whatever that it is, where her seat could maybe determine this thing, and the only way she's going to win is if she's populous enough to win middle class voters to keep them with her.